In the time of Joshua, the land of Israel was divided to territories for each of the tribes, and a small central area was given to the tribe of Benjamin, because at that time the tribe of Benjamin was not large, and that territory had Jerusalem on the southern border. Jerusalem had been occupied by Jebusites, and they were defeated by Joshua. But the Benjamites did not occupy the city, and so the Jebusites eventually grew stronger and stronger. And during the time of King Saul, Jerusalem was not considered to be an Israelite city. It was a Jebusite city. Of course, many Jews would have done business in that city, for it was a strong centre, but it was also a proud centre. And the Benjamites hadn't taken the opportunity they had at the beginning to properly take control of it. At the end of 1 Chronicles chapter 9, we read of Saul's sons, and in chapter 10 we find what happened to Saul's family and why they did not continue as kings. Jeiel, the father of Gibeon, whose wife's name was Maacah, dwelt at Gibeon, which was just near Jerusalem. His firstborn son was Abdon, then Zur, Kish, Baal, Ner, Nadab, Gedor, Ahiah, Zechariah, and Mikloth. And Mikloth begot Shimeam. They also dwelt alongside their relatives in Jerusalem with their brethren. Ner begot Kish, Kish begot Saul, and Saul begot Jonathan, Melchishua, Abinadab, and Eshbaal. The son of Jonathan was Meribbaal, and Meribbaal begot Micah. The sons of Micah were Pithon, Melech, Tahriah, and Ahaz. And Ahaz begot Jarah. Jarah begot Elameth, Asmaveth, and Zimri. And Zimri begot Mozah. Mozah begot Beniah, Rephaiah his son, Eleazar his son, and Asahel his son. And Asahel had 6 sons whose names were these: Azrikam, Bakiri, Ishmael, Shariah, Obadiah, and Hanan. These were the sons of Asahel. Chapter 10. Now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. Then the Philistines followed hard after Saul and his sons, and the Philistines killed Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua, Saul's sons. The battle became fierce against Saul. The archers hit him, and he was wounded by the archers. Then Saul said to his armour-bearer, "Draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised men come and abuse me." But his armour-bearer would not, for he was greatly afraid. Therefore Saul took a sword and fell on it. And when his armour-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell on his sword and died. So Saul and his 3 sons died, and all his house died together. And when all the men of Israel who were in the valley saw that they had fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they forsook their cities and fled. Then the Philistines came and dwelt in them. So it happened the next day that the Philistines came to strip the slain, that they found Saul and his sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. And they stripped him, and took his head and his armour, and sent word throughout the land of the Philistines, to proclaim the news in the temple of their idols, and among the people. Then they put his armour in the temple of their gods, and fastened his head in the temple of Dagon. And when all Jabesh-Gilead heard all that the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose, and took the body of Saul, and the bodies of his sons, and they brought them to Jabesh, and buried their bones under the tamarisk tree at Jabesh, and fasted 7 days. So Saul died for his unfaithfulness which he had committed against the Lord, because he did not keep the word of the Lord, and also because he consulted a medium for guidance. But he did not inquire of the Lord. Therefore he killed him, and turned the kingdom over to David, the son of Jesse. My name's Arthur, and I thank you for joining me as we share this sad tale of the demise of Saul and his kingdom. As an introduction to chapter 11, which will deal with the establishment of David as king, the dynasty that would continue down to the time of Jesus Christ, and how it was that Jerusalem, which should have been Benjaminite territory, became the city of David, who was of the tribe of Judah. But nevertheless, as we've noted, the Benjamites continued to live in the city, descendants of Jonathan, Saul's son, who was a very strong supporter of David, whom David loved. So David didn't wipe out the descendants of Saul, but they became residents of his city. Now, the details given here were also given in the book of Samuel. There we were given two accounts of the death of King Saul. One agrees with this one, and the other one was an account given by an Amalekite who was claiming credit for having killed Saul, thinking that he would be rewarded by David for having killed David's enemy. But he was rewarded by being executed on his own testimony that he had killed the king, the Lord's anointed. The importance of this passage, though, is to show that the establishment of David as king was not, as happens in most cases, that we have an ambitious leader who pushes against an existing leader until he overcomes them. It was the Philistines who killed King Saul. Well, actually, not the Philistines, but Saul himself. In the end, he asked his armour-bearer to do it, but his armour-bearer was too scared to do it. And so Saul committed suicide. Suicide is a major problem in our society today. It's something that seems to be taken when people have lost hope. They have no hope of salvation. They have no hope in God. And the gospel is all about giving people hope in the darkest hours and darkest circumstances. Well, Saul's armour-bearer also committed suicide because he had failed to save his master. The battle was lost to the Philistines, but David would rise up and establish victory over the Philistines in a relatively short period of time because he was faithful to God. The reason Saul died was for his unfaithfulness, we are told. He was unfaithful to God because he didn't keep the word of God. And so when he wanted advice, he turned to a medium for guidance. He did not inquire of God. This is the fundamental that we need to understand. God is for us when we seek him. But if we are not faithful to him, as he is faithful to us, then he will leave us to our own devices, and that is a disaster. When the Philistines discovered Saul's body, they boasted before their God and fastened his head in the temple of Dagon. But that victory would be short-lived, because Dagon is no god at all. He's just the construction of men's hands, and his worship is in vain. The people of Jabesh Gilead honoured Saul, because one of the first things that Saul had done 40 years earlier was to deliver the people of Jabesh Gilead from the Midianites, when the Midianites sought to overrun their territory. And the other connection with the people of Jabesh Gilead is that when the Benjamites were all but wiped out, it was the daughters of Jabesh Gilead that provided wives for the Benjaminites, that the tribe should be re-established. So God would make promises that all the tribes of Israel would continue, that there would always be a remnant. And in this way, God has maintained a remnant and glory and honour for the house of Saul.